Some nurses forget their place, and I make sure they remember it. That is what Dr. Caldwell said 47 minutes before Sergeant Major Tom Hendricks arrived at Cedar Creek Medical with injuries that would expose everything. Danielle Ross moves through the ICU night shift with practiced invisibility. Her scrubs are navy blue, standard issue, concealing scars that run from shoulder to ribs like a map of Fallujah drawn in scar tissue. The fluorescent lights hum above empty corridors at 11 p.m., a frequency that makes her teeth ache after Baghdad silence. She pauses at the supply cabinet on Unit 7, retrieving a tarnished challenge coin from her pocket, brass oxidized to black, edges worn smooth from 14 years of being carried in the same cargo pocket. She examines it under the harsh light for 3 seconds. The inscription on the reverse is faded but legible if you know what you are looking for. She tucks it back into her pocket and continues toward the medication dispensary. Her hands move with the efficiency of someone who has done this 10,000 times. Charting vitals. Checking 4 lines. Verifying 2 nurses on controlled substances. Protocol, always protocol. But there is something in the way she reviews the same chart 3 times, cross-references dosages against the previous shift notes, and photographs a medication label with her phone that suggests training that exists in a completely different classification. She takes a photograph of the label. The name of the drug. The hospital code. The timestamp, 11:11 p.m. Dr. Richard Caldwell passes her in the hallway at 11:52 p.m. without acknowledgement, his white coat pristine and starched, his phone pressed to his ear discussing revenue optimization with someone on the other end. His voice carries the kind of casual arrogance that comes from never having been told no. The upcoding on cardiac procedures runs clean. I've got the template built. We push another 18% through billing and they'll never catch it. Ross does not slow her pace. She does not look at him. Her eyes are forward, her jaw loose, her breathing unchanged. But she hears every word. She sees him 3 minutes later, outside the billing office on the 2nd floor. The door is supposed to be locked after 10 p.m. It is open. Caldwell stands at the copier, the blue light flashing across his face, photocopying patient files. Not a few files. Stacks of them. Insurance claims. Billing codes. Procedure reports. Her eyes track him for exactly 3 seconds before she rounds the corner and disappears into the stairwell. She does not stop. She does not report it. Not yet. But her hands are trembling now, and she does not let anyone see. The night shift has 9 hours remaining. Ross continues her rounds on Unit 7, checking on post-operative patients, verifying medication administration times, ensuring the saline drips are running at the correct milliliters per hour. A patient in Bay 4 is recovering from a spinal fusion, BP stable at 118/76, O2 saturation at 97% on 2 liters of nasal cannula. The heart monitor beeps its steady rhythm like a metronome. She adjusts his pillows. She does not speak beyond what is necessary. Pain level. The patient says 5. She documents it, 11:58 p.m., pain level 5/10, patient alert and oriented times 3. She does not deviate from protocol. She does not draw attention. Her badge reads Danielle Ross, RN. Registered nurse. The title is accurate. The rest of her identity exists in file folders in the Pentagon, in classified databases that were scrubbed 7 years ago when her unit was deactivated and she was officially discharged as medically unfit for duty. The medical unfitness was a fiction, a legal cover for black ops operators who needed to vanish into civilian life and never be found. She had chosen Cedar Creek Medical because they hired quietly and did not ask extensive questions about gaps in work history. She had been invisible here for 2 years. She had kept the night shift. She had never spoken to Dr. Caldwell directly. She had done nothing to draw attention to herself. Until she noticed the billing discrepancies. A 67-year-old patient was admitted for a routine cholecystectomy, gallbladder removal, straightforward procedure, should take 90 minutes. The surgical report showed 1 hour and 40 minutes. The billing code charged for 3 hours. The anesthesiologist was billed at $220 per 15-minute unit. The chart showed 9 units charged. 14 hours of anesthesia billed for a procedure that took 90 minutes. She saw the pattern once and then she could not unsee it. It appeared in 8 patient files from the previous 2 weeks. In 12 more from the week before that. Caldwell's signature was on every inflated invoice. She documented what she found in a private encrypted note on her phone. Drug names, dosages, billing codes, dates and times. She took photographs of charts during her lunch break when no one was watching. She did not access files she was not authorized to see. She did not break protocol. She simply looked at what was already available and saw the pattern that everyone else had missed. That was 3 weeks ago. Caldwell noticed the increased attention to his billing files 2 days later. He had security logs installed on the charting system. He could see every file that was accessed and who had accessed it. When Ross's user ID appeared on patient charts from cardiac procedures, files completely unrelated to her ICU assignments, he made the connection. A nurse who was asking too many questions. A nurse who was photographing billing codes during her lunch break. A nurse who was accessing files beyond her scope of work. He had been running his insurance fraud operation for 18 months. His take was roughly $47,000 per month. That money went to a private investment account in Grand Cayman. It funded the down payment on a lake house in the Pocono Mountains. It paid for his ex-wife's silence regarding the affairs and the gambling debts. He was not about to let a night shift nurse dismantle everything. And what he did not know, sitting in his pristine office at midnight reviewing the security logs, was that Danielle Ross was not simply a night shift nurse. She was not someone who could be intimidated or isolated or destroyed through traditional institutional pressure. He did not know that her hands had held 387 patients through open cardiac massage in field hospitals across 4 continents. He did not know that she had survived 18 interrogation sessions without breaking protocol. He did not know that she had been decorated for valor by 3 different military branches and classified by a 2-star general as the finest trauma operator in the Western Hemisphere. He did not know that the tarnished challenge coin she carried was made from the twisted fuselage of a Black Hawk helicopter that had been shot down in 2009, and that 17 of the 19 people who walked away from that wreckage had survived because she had held their lives together with her hands while mortar rounds landed within 300 meters. He only saw a problem. And problems, for Dr. Richard Caldwell, had always been solved through institutional power. The emergency department doors burst open at 12:11 a.m. Paramedics rush into Cedar Creek with a critical motor vehicle accident victim. The radio crackles, 38-year-old male, T-bone collision at the intersection of Broad and Spruce, damage to passenger side, extraction time 23 minutes, GCS of 8 upon extrication, multiple trauma, massive internal bleeding, ETA trauma bay in 4 minutes, alert the attending and trauma surgery now. The stretcher wheels squeak across the tile floor like something breaking. Ross is charting in the ICU when the code call goes out. She does not look up immediately. She finishes documenting the vital signs. She closes the charting screen. And then she stands. The paramedics wheel the stretcher into Trauma Bay 3. Massive abdominal distension. Pelvis fractured in at least 2 places, the kind of damage that comes from a vehicle rolling at impact velocity. Blood loss already significant. BP 94/62 and dropping. Heart rate 134. The paramedics rattle off their report in the clipped, efficient language of people who have seen catastrophic injury 5,000 times. Facial trauma. Possible spinal injury. Unresponsive to verbal stimuli. The ER resident does a rapid primary survey, airway, breathing, circulation, and starts pushing fluids. A nurse cuts away his clothes. They expose his chest and abdomen, and the trauma attending, Dr. Susan Pierce, begins her examination. Danielle Ross stands at the periphery of the trauma bay, partially hidden behind the equipment monitor, watching the man's face as they work on him. She goes completely still. His face is unmistakable, even crushed and swollen with impact trauma. The structure of his jaw. The scar across his left temple from a mortar fragment in Kandahar. The tattoo on his right shoulder, the Marine Corps emblem with a date beneath it, the 3rd of December, 2009. She has not seen this face in 8 years. 8 years since she left the service. 8 years since the last deployment debrief. 8 years since she was officially erased. Sergeant Major Tom Hendricks. The man who had written letters to her son every week during Jake's darkest deployment. The man who had pulled the body bag onto the transport helicopter when the IED took her son and 8 others in Anbar province 4 years ago. The man who had saluted her at Arlington Cemetery while she stood in dress blues, holding her son's folded American flag and pretending she did not recognize him, pretending she had never served, pretending to be just the mother of the deceased and nothing more. The trauma attending SNAP's orders. Type and cross for 12 units of O negative. Get 2 large bore pores running wide open. Someone call trauma surgery. We're looking at a massive hemothorax, possible tension pneumothorax on the left side, abdominal trauma with probable liver laceration and maybe splenic rupture. The words come fast, stacked on each other, the vocabulary of people racing against death. The monitor shows BP dropping 92/60. The oxygen saturation is stable at 97%, but the heart rate climbs higher, 142 now, and climbing. Pain and blood loss pushing the cardiovascular system into compensation failure. Ross moves. Not fast. Not conspicuous. She simply materializes at the medication cart and begins preparing supplies. 2 large bore angiocaths. Saline flush for the 4 lines. She is where she is supposed to be. She is doing what she is supposed to do. But her jaw is locked tight, and her breathing is very controlled, and when she passes the stretcher to retrieve the suction catheter, her eyes look at the man's face for a fraction of a second. Dr. Pierce is still talking, and the team is still moving, and no one has any idea that the nurse who just appeared with the portrait knows every scar on this man's body. Knows that he was the one who taught her son how to survive. Knows that he was the one holding Jake's hand when the IED detonated. Knows this because Jake's commanding officer had written her a letter she had read 3,000 times in the privacy of her apartment at 3 a.m., describing how her son had been joking about his girlfriend and the future and the wedding they would plan when the deployment ended, and then the world had stopped. She sets the 4 supplies on the side table and steps back into the professional distance that hospital protocol demands. The patient is rushed to the OR within 11 minutes. Hemorrhage control. Trauma surgery. The kind of injury that kills most people before they reach the hospital. Tom Hendricks is still breathing when they wheel him toward the operating room. BP is 78/54. The hiss of oxygen flowing through the mask. The sound of surgical instruments being laid out. The doors to the OR swing shut behind them. Ross returns to the ICU. She sits at the charting station. She does not access his file yet. She simply sits. Her hands are folded on the desk in front of her. The tarnished challenge coin presses against her sternum from inside her scrub pocket. The fluorescent lights hum above her head, and somewhere in the building, Dr. Caldwell is asleep, completely unaware that his problem with the night shift nurse has become someone else's entirely. She waits for him to wake up. The conference room at Cedar Creek Medical filled with the low hum of 30 residents settling into chairs at 7 in the morning, their coffee cups steaming, their laptops open, their attention already fractured. Danielle Ross stood against the back wall in her rumpled scrubs, the fabric still carrying the faint smell of betadine and the weight of a 12-hour shift. Her badge hung from a beaded lanyard that had belonged to a Marine who didn't come home from Kandahar. Nobody here knew that. Nobody here knew anything. Dr. Caldwell entered with the posture of a man who'd rehearsed his entrance, his white coat pressed sharp enough to cut glass, his expression already arranged into the benevolent superiority of someone about to teach a lesson. He didn't acknowledge Ross. He didn't need to. He'd been waiting for this moment since the night she'd started asking questions about billing codes and phantom specialists. "Let's talk about scope creep," he said, projecting his voice across the room with the practiced ease of a man who'd spent 20 years talking down to people. He clicked to the first slide, and Danielle's patient chart appeared on the screen behind him, enlarged, intimate, her handwriting visible in every corner. Her jaw tightened, not enough to be noticed, not enough to be called composure. It was simply not moving at all. This is what happens when nurses exceed their scope. Caldwell circled several entries in red, the cursor moving with theatrical precision. Nurse Ross here decided to audit our billing codes. He paused. Let the silence work. Perhaps she thinks her online degree qualifies her for hospital administration. Polite laughter rippled through the room like dominoes falling. A few residents glanced back toward Ross. Most didn't. Most looked away before their eyes reached her. She stood motionless. Hands at her sides. Face empty as a cleared hard drive. She accessed 47 patient files last month without authorization, Caldwell continued, his voice dropping into the registered doctors use when they're disappointed in you. 47. Not 2. Not 5. 47. I have to ask, he turned to face the room, his expression inviting them into a shared conspiracy against her. Looking for what, exactly? A medical degree hidden in the EMR system? Or are we conducting our own private investigation? His eyes locked onto hers across the room. 30 residents turned to watch her response. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, that particular frequency that made the air itself seem cheap and institutional. She met his gaze. Said nothing. Her breathing remained steady, a soldier's breathing, a warrior's breathing, the kind of calm that came from having already survived the worst the world could offer. 2 nurses she trained, Jennifer Martinez and Marcus Chen, studied their shoes like the answers to every question might be written in the floor tile. Jennifer had been crying in the supply closet 3 weeks ago when a patient flatlined unexpectedly, and Ross had walked in and stood beside her in silence for 4 minutes before saying, "You gave him 5 more days than anyone else would have." That was the kind of leadership that didn't survive in institutions like this one. Caldwell's smile widened. The smile of someone who'd successfully cornered prey. Care to enlighten us, or are you conducting your own private investigation, Nurse Ross? She was quiet for 3 seconds. Long enough to feel like forever. Then she looked away, not down, not submissively, but to the side, the way someone looks when they're done listening to a child explain why they broke the window. The room stayed silent. Caldwell held the moment, savoring it, then clicked to the next slide as if she'd been dismissed. His power was not in what he'd said. It was in his certainty that she had no authority to speak back. 90 minutes later, Ross retrieved coffee from the vending machine on the 3rd floor, the one near the supply closet where the old equipment got stored. 2 voices approached from around the corner, Dr. Pierce and Dr. Womack, Caldwell's loyal lieutenants, the kind of doctors who'd learned early that advancement in hospitals flowed from alignment with men like him. Caldwell's got her number, Pierce was saying, his voice carrying the ease of someone who believed no one important was listening. Nurses who think they're detectives always crash eventually. She's been flagging chart discrepancies to quality review, Womack replied. Doesn't know when to stop asking questions. That's how you burn. Ross's finger hovered over the coffee button for exactly 2 seconds longer than normal, the only sign she heard them. The vending machine dispensed her cup with a mechanical wheeze. She turned to leave without acknowledging their presence, and neither man even glanced in her direction. To them, she was already invisible. To them, she was already gone. But that wasn't the worst part. At the ICU nursing station that afternoon, she logged into the computer terminal to review Sergeant Major Hendrick's updated chart. His vital signs from the morning showed the post-operative fluctuation she'd flagged to Dr. Singh. Blood pressure trending downward. Heart rhythm irregularities that didn't match the surgical notes from yesterday. She pulled up the procedure documentation and froze. The specialist listed on the billing code was a Dr. Michael Trent, cardiothoracic surgery. She'd worked at Cedar Creek for 4 years. She'd never seen this name before. She photographed the screen with her personal phone, just the billing section, just the inconsistencies. Her hands moved with the precision of someone who documented intelligence in war zones where paper trails disappeared if you weren't careful. The door to Hendricks' room was 2 steps away. She pushed through and checked his vitals manually, blood pressure 89/52, dropping. His cardiac monitor showed the same irregular rhythm. She adjusted his for line and his eyes fluttered open, confused, swimming through whatever sedation cocktail the surgeons had pumped into him. He looked at her and his voice came out scratched, barely audible. "Jake." "Jake's mom." She nodded once. That was all she allowed herself. "Your boy." His hand moved toward hers, the gesture of a man trying to hold on to reality in the fog of painkillers. "Best Marine I ever met. Brave kid. So brave." She said nothing. She simply stood there while his eyes closed again, while his breathing slowed, while his hand fell back to the bed. This man had written her son letters every week for 6 months. Letters she'd found in Jake's locker after the IED took him. Letters about courage and duty and the kind of honor that didn't require anyone else to witness it. At the nurse's station, she documented the vital sign changes and flagged the deterioration to Dr. Singh, the on-call attending. He glanced at the monitor, barely breaking stride on his way to another patient. "Post-op fluctuation," Singh said, the words automatic, dismissive. "Normal parameters." "He's fine." "His repair," Ross said quietly. "The surgical notes don't align with his current presentation." Singh's eyes narrowed, that particular look doctors get when a nurse has overstepped into the territory of diagnosis. "The repair is solid, Ross. Dr. Caldwell performed it himself." She didn't push. Pushing would confirm what Caldwell had already announced, that she was the kind of nurse who didn't know her place. But she reviewed the surgical notes again in the medication room, door closed, the way she'd learned to conduct intelligence analysis in a forward surgical unit outside Baghdad where conventional medicine wasn't an option. The cardiothoracic repair showed inconsistencies. The specialist consultation was phantom. The procedure listed didn't match the anatomical findings documented in the post-op notes. Someone had coded this wrong, deliberately or through gross negligence. Either way, Hendricks was at risk. At 11 p.m., when the ICU fell into that particular rhythm of night shift silence, she saw them approach Dr. Caldwell with 2 security guards in their institutional grey uniforms and Patricia Voss, the hospital administrator, her expression carrying that specific blend of regret and institutional protocol. "Nurse Ross," Caldwell said, his voice formal now, the way voice becomes when there are witnesses and paper trails. "You're being placed on administrative review pending investigation of unauthorized record access and insubordination. You're restricted from patient care until further notice." He handed her a letter. She read it once. Her eyes moved across the page at a steady pace, taking in every word, understanding exactly what this meant. When she finished, she folded it precisely in thirds and held it at her side. "Sergeant Major Hendricks requires monitoring," she said, her voice carrying no inflection whatsoever. "His repair is failing." Caldwell's smile didn't reach his eyes. He was holding all the visible cards now, and they both knew it. "That's no longer your concern. Dr. Pierce has his care now. You'll be working administrative duties only, pending review completion." She looked toward Hendricks' room. She could see the blue glow of his monitor through the observation window. His chest rising and falling. His heart still beating, for now. She looked back at Caldwell. "Understood," she said. The word carried no emotion whatsoever. It was simply a statement of fact. She understood that the rules of this institution had just been weaponized against her. She understood that a man protecting his fraud had activated his entire network to isolate anyone who might expose it. She understood that 4 years of careful invisibility had ended the moment she'd asked the wrong questions about a patient chart. What Caldwell didn't understand was that she'd spent 23 years learning to operate when every conventional authority had walked away. He thought he was firing a nurse. He was, in fact, removing the last institutional restraint on someone who'd already been trained to save lives in conditions where failure wasn't an option. She turned and walked toward the locker room, her footsteps even against the tile floor, her composure so absolute that none of them, not Caldwell, not the guards, not Patricia Voss, recognized it for what it actually was. Not the composure of someone defeated. The composure of someone who'd just become unmoored from every consequence that had previously bound her to silence. And then the phone rang. It was the ICU. It was 11:47 p.m. And when Ross answered, Dr. Pierce's voice came through tight with a specific panic that means a patient you've written off is about to prove you wrong. We're getting significant dysrhythmias. BP's dropping. He's going south fast. Orders? She was suspended from patient care. Orders from her would be unauthorized, inappropriate, grounds for further discipline. She said 3 words, "Call Dr. Caldwell." And she hung up. The medication room door closed behind Ross with a soft pneumatic hiss. The fluorescent lights overhead cast everything in surgical white, and she moved to the computer terminal with the quiet efficiency of someone who'd learned to be invisible in spaces she didn't technically belong. Hendricks' chart pulled up on the screen. She scrolled through the surgical notes from the afternoon repair. Dr. Caldwell had overseen a complex internal hemorrhage control, documented as a success, vital stable, bleeding controlled. But something in the procedure log didn't align. A consultation fee billed to Dr. Marcus Pierce, the trauma surgeon. Except Pierce had been in surgery on the 4th floor during the recorded time of that consultation. The timestamp showed 3:08 p.m. Ross remembered Pierce walking past the break room at 3:51, still in his original surgical scrubs from the multi-trauma case 2 floors up. She pulled up the billing code. Neurosurgical specialist notation. But Hendricks' injury was thoracic, not neurological. The phantom consultation fee sat there on the screen like a confession, $2 for 100 billed to insurance for a doctor who'd never been present in the operating room. Her jaw tightened imperceptibly. Just like the 3 other cases she'd noticed during night shifts. Just like the pattern that had caught her attention 2 weeks ago when she'd been pulling medication histories and stumbled across duplicate anesthesia charges, upgraded procedure codes, consultants listed on charts who'd never scrubbed in. The insurance fraud didn't surprise her anymore. What surprised her was how methodical Caldwell had become. 18 months of this. 18 months of phantom specialists, upgraded surgical codes, duplicate facility fees. She'd done the math during her 2 a.m. coffee breaks. Rough estimate put the total scheme at somewhere north of $847,000. More than enough to fund a comfortable second home. More than enough to invest in real estate, which is exactly what Caldwell had done according to the property records she'd seen cross the desk when processing a donation request. But it was more than the money that made her jaw set this way. It was the contempt. The absolute arrogance of assuming no one would notice. The certainty that a nurse, just a nurse, wouldn't have the knowledge to recognize surgical codes, wouldn't understand the timeline of specialty consultations, wouldn't be able to cross-reference ICU logs against billing receipts. Caldwell had built his operation on the assumption that everyone beneath him was too stupid, too distracted, or too afraid to look closely. She'd spent 14 years in Baghdad watching officers make exactly that same calculation, and she'd watched it kill people. Her hands moved across the keyboard with deliberate precision. The chart expanded, showing the full billing summary. There. Another impossible consultation, a cardiology review billed for 4:22 p.m. on a day when the cardiac team had been in an emergency STEMI intervention across campus. She pulled up the staff schedule. Dr. Valente, listed as the consulting cardiologist, had documented his presence in the operating room at precisely 4:15 p.m., according to the block notes. Physically impossible to then perform a separate cardiology consultation 7 minutes later in Hendricks' room. The numbers didn't lie. The system didn't lie. Only Caldwell lied. She thought about what she'd heard in the hallway outside the break room. The 2 residents, their voices pitched low and careful, laughing about nurses who think they're detectives. Caldwell's voice cutting through the laughter. Security will escort her out of this hospital if she accesses one more file without authorization. Is that understood? The threat hadn't been a suggestion. It had been a promise. Access one more file. She was currently 3 files deep: Hendricks' chart, the billing summary, the staff schedule cross-reference. One more would be 4. That would be the threshold. That would trigger whatever mechanism Caldwell had already put in place. Security would arrive. Her badge would be deactivated. She'd be walked out of Cedar Creek Medical by officers in uniforms while staff watched from the nursing stations. Her career as a nurse would be over. Not just suspended. Over. Over in the way that doesn't come back from, the way that follows you to the next hospital and the one after that. A nurse who'd accessed files without authorization. A nurse who'd violated HIPAA protocols. A nurse who'd betrayed patient privacy for her own agenda. That's what the paperwork would say. That's what future employers would read. She'd spent 23 years, 14 of those in the desert, 9 of them here in Philadelphia, working nights and keeping her head down and never, ever drawing attention to herself, and all of it could evaporate in one security escort walk from the medication room to the parking lot. Her hands rested on the keyboard. The room was silent except for the soft mechanical breath of the fax system. Outside the medication room window, the ICU sprawled across the unit, the monitors glowing their soft blue light, the ventilators maintaining their rhythmic hiss, the night nurses moving between rooms with the focused calm of people who understood that 2:53 a.m. was when the sickest patients deteriorated. Hendricks was in room for 12. She could see his room from here, the lights still on, the monitor still displaying his vitals, his chest still rising and falling with the assistance of the mechanical ventilator. He was stable now. Post-op from the surgical repair. Caldwell had closed at 5:24 p.m., noted the repair as complete, recommended monitoring but no further intervention. Everything appeared to have gone according to plan. Everything except for the fact that every step of that plan had been built on fraud. Every specialist consultation that never happened. Every upgraded code. Every phantom fee. It all funneled back through Caldwell's network of insurance claims to build his retirement at the expense of a system that was supposed to protect people. She thought about Jake. About the challenge coin in her locker, tarnished metal, bent edges, recovered from blast site debris 4 years ago when the IED took her son's convoy in Kandahar. About the fact that Hendricks had written Jake letters every single week for 3 tours, and then continued writing them even after the notification officers came to her door. About the weight of that kind of loyalty, that kind of faithfulness to someone he didn't have to care about. And then she thought about the fact that this man, this sergeant major who'd been her son's commanding officer, who'd been her son's friend, who'd been the last person Jake had called before the convoy rolled out that morning, was lying in room for 12 with a surgical repair that Caldwell had built on phantom consultations and upgraded codes, which meant the integrity of the procedure itself was now suspect. Which meant the repair could fail. Which meant that Hendricks could die not because his injuries were unsalvageable, but because the doctor who'd supposedly fixed him had been too busy committing fraud to actually focus on the work. Her face revealed nothing as she logged into the system again. The next file appeared on the screen. Medical records cross-reference. Hand-off notes. The surgical team's documentation of the actual consultations that had occurred versus the consultations that had been billed. This was the 4th file. This was the threshold. This was the moment where she made the choice between her career and her integrity, and she'd learned a long time ago that there was no actual choice involved. You either looked away or you didn't. You either protected people or you didn't. There was no middle ground where you could pretend to be both things at once. The file opened. Medical data populated the screen. Times, names, procedures, consultations that had and hadn't occurred. Every piece of evidence she needed. All of it right there. All of it damning. All of it career-ending if security walked in right now and found her reading it. She didn't hesitate. She didn't tremble. She didn't look away from the screen. Her hands were steady as she scrolled through the documentation, committing the details to memory, cross-referencing the phantom fees against the actual staff schedules. The numbers were even worse than she'd initially calculated. Closer to $1.2 million when you factored in the duplicate anesthesia charges and the facility upgrades that Caldwell had billed but never actually provided. 18 months. One carefully orchestrated theft from the insurance system that ultimately rippled backward through premiums and denials and benefits that were unavailable because Caldwell had redirected the money into his own accounts. She knew the mechanics of institutional fraud because she'd studied it during her time at Langley before everything went quiet and the Pentagon reclassified her unit and made her a ghost. You didn't have to be a financial analyst to understand that money stolen from an insurance system was money stolen from the people the insurance system was supposed to protect. It was a slower kind of violence than the kind she'd experienced in Baghdad, but it was violence nonetheless. It killed through denial, through delays, through the slow erosion of trust in systems that were supposed to care. The medication room door was still closed. No one had entered. No one had noticed her yet. The hospital hummed with its nighttime rhythm, quieter than the day's shift, but never truly silent. Somewhere on a monitor in the ICU, an alarm would sound every 90 seconds because a patient's oxygen saturation would dip, and someone would walk over and check the line, and the alarm would reset, and the patient would drift back to sleep. The machinery never really rested. Neither did she. She finished reading the file. She logged out of the system. Her badge would have a timestamp now, 2:51 a.m., medication room, for files accessed in rapid succession. Caldwell would see it when he reviewed the security logs in the morning. He'd know. He'd activate whatever network of favors and pressure and institutional power he'd been building, and she'd be gone before sunrise. But the file was documented now. The evidence was clear. And when Caldwell's network came for her, she'd know exactly why they were coming, and she'd know that it was worth it. She pulled off her gloves, sealed them in the biohazard container, stepped out of the medication room into the ICU. The night stretched ahead of her, a few more hours before the morning shift arrived to take over, a few more hours before everything changed. She had a choice about what to do with those hours. She could walk out of Cedar Creek Medical right now and save her career. She could pretend she'd never seen the billing codes, never recognized the phantom consultations, never understood what Caldwell had been doing. She could be someone else, the invisible nurse who worked nights and kept her head down and never asked questions. She could survive. Or she could stay. She could wait for the code that would inevitably come from Hendricks' room when the surgical repair began to fail. And she could decide what kind of person she was going to be when that moment arrived. The code alarm screamed at 2:51 a.m. 3 short blasts that meant someone's heart had stopped working, and Ross was already moving before the second beep finished echoing down the corridor. She set down her cold coffee in the staff lounge, the cup still half full, steam curling off the surface like a final breath. Her feet carried her through the hallway on muscle memory, the same route she'd taken 1,000 times, the same rhythm she'd learned in forward surgical units outside Fallujah when the mortars fell close enough to shake the walls. She didn't run. Running drew attention. She walked with the economical precision of someone who'd learned that panic kills patients faster than the wounds themselves. Hendricks' room erupted with bodies the moment she arrived. Dr. Caldwell was already there with his surgical team, trauma surgeons named Pierce and Womack, cardiologist Dr. Valente, and the on-call attending Dr. Singh. 5 doctors. A full tribunal of white coats standing around the bed like pallbearers who'd already written the eulogy. The monitor showed asystole. A flat line. The electrical activity of his heart had simply stopped, like someone had switched off a light. Ross moved to the foot of the bed. Nobody acknowledged her. She was invisible here now, a nurse already crossed off the roster, and that invisibility was going to save Hendricks' life. Caldwell examined the surgical site. The repair from 6 hours ago was hemorrhaging internally. Blood was pooling where it shouldn't, drowning Hendricks from the inside. His face had the color of old paper. The surgeons exchanged looks, the kind of looks that meant they'd already decided what was coming next. His pressure's unresponsive to fluids, Valente said. Numbers like weapons. 60/40 and dropping. The internal bleeding is catastrophic, Pierce added, his voice clinical, empty. Even if we open him again, we can't control it. He's non-viable. Dr. Singh checked the monitor one more time, as if it might have changed its mind. It hadn't. The flat line remained flat. He turned to Caldwell. Extraordinary measures at this point would only prolong. Agreed, Caldwell said. The word fell like a gavel. Call it. He walked out. Pierce and Womack followed. Valente paused by the door, his hand on the frame for a moment, then disappeared. Dr. Singh lingered just long enough to turn off the defibrillator, as if removing the temptation to try was mercy. Then he too was gone, his footsteps fading down the hallway toward the next patient, the next tragedy, the next case that might actually be winnable. 5 doctors had examined Hendricks. 5 doctors had declared him already dead. The monitor continued its flatlined song. The ventilator wheezed its mechanical rhythm, pushing air into lungs that no longer had a brain ordering them to breathe. Ross stood alone in the room with a man who'd written her son letters every week during his darkest deployment, letters that arrived at her apartment in careful military handwriting, letters that said Jake was going to be okay, that she'd raised a good man, that she should be proud. Jake had been killed by an IED 4 years ago. Hendricks had been there when they recovered the body. Ross moved to the supply cart. Her hands pulled on sterile gloves, the latex snapped like a gunshot in the silence. She retrieved the defibrillation pads from their package. 2 attempts. Maybe 3. The protocol said 5 minutes of resuscitation before you accepted what the monitor was telling you. 5 minutes was 300 seconds. She had that much time before the arrest became pronounceable. The defibrillator charged with its electronic whine. Clear. She pressed the pads to his chest, and his body convulsed once, twice. The monitor remained flat. No response. She charged again. Delivered the shock. Again nothing. A third time, the machine climbing through jowls like a desperate prayer being spoken in a language nobody understood anymore. The monitor's flatline remained unmoved. She set down the paddles. Her eyes moved from his chest to her hands, hands that had held compression dressings against mortar wounds, hands that had tied tourniquets in the screaming dark outside Baghdad, hands that had performed emergency surgery on patients who were already going to die anyway because the choice wasn't save them or let them die. The choice was try everything or accept they were already gone. And she had never been very good at accepting. Ross picked up the scalpel. The blade was sharp enough to part skin like water. She made the first incision, a midline, down through skin and fascia, each cut precise as calligraphy. The median sternotomy took 90 seconds, her hands moving through muscle memory so deep it didn't require thought, just execution. The chest opened like a book someone had finally decided to read. Rib spread. Pericardium exposed. The heart itself, blue and still, waiting. Her hands reached in. They found his heart, a mass no larger than a clenched fist, heavy with blood it couldn't pump anymore. She withdrew it slightly, enough to access it, and her fingers began the compression. Direct cardiac massage. The rhythm was exact. The pressure was exact. Every beat of her hands was saying no to 5 doctors' consensus, no to the flat line, no to the idea that Sergeant Major Tom Hendricks was already dead. 2 minutes. Her arms were burning, but the rhythm never wavered. The muscle memory from Fallujah was different from a textbook rhythm. It was the rhythm she'd learned when the surgical unit got hit and the anesthesiologist was down and the attending surgeon was 3 minutes out and a Marine had stopped bleeding because his heart had stopped pumping. The rhythm for when there was no time for perfect form, only for perfect outcome. 5 minutes. Her shoulders screamed. She could feel lactic acid pooling in her biceps, but her hand stayed steady. She thought about Jake's letter, the one Hendricks had written the day after the IED took him. The one where he'd said Jake had been brave at the end. The one where he'd asked Ross not to give up on the living because there weren't enough of them left. 10 minutes. The monitor still showed flat line, but her hands kept compressing. 70 compressions per minute. Perfect intervals. Her breathing remained controlled, measured, the breathing of someone who'd learned to dissociate from pain, who'd learned to treat her own body as a tool rather than an organism with its own limits. 15 minutes. A nurse appeared in the doorway, her face white. She whispered something about calling the code, about time of death protocols, about what Ross was doing being unauthorized. Ross didn't acknowledge her. The nurse left. Nobody was going to stop this. Not now. 17 minutes. Ross felt something shift. A flutter. A single, irregular beat. So faint she almost missed it, almost thought it was her imagination or the phantom sensation of hope making her feel things that weren't real. 19 minutes. Another beat. Stronger. The monitor flickered. For one moment the flat line broke, showed a spike, then returned to flatness. But Ross had felt it. His heart had fired once on its own. 22 minutes. The monitor spiked again. And held. The rhythm appeared, sinus rhythm, slow but genuine. The electrical activity of a heart that had decided to keep working. The blue organ beneath her hands convulsed once, then began its own contractions. She could feel it. The blood beginning to circulate again, the neurons in his brain beginning to receive oxygen, the possibility of continued existence reasserting itself against 5 doctors' certainties. She withdrew her hands carefully. Sutured the chest with the same precision she'd opened it. Her hands were steady. Her breathing remained controlled. She was sealing up his thoracic cavity when the trauma bay doors exploded open. Dr. Caldwell froze in the doorway. His face underwent a transformation, confusion, then recognition of what he was seeing, then something that looked like rage. "What have you done?" His voice shattered the silence like dropped glass. "You performed surgery? You opened his chest? You're not a surgeon. You're a nurse. You just violated every protocol in this hospital." Ross continued working. Her sutures were neat, precise. She didn't acknowledge him. Didn't defend herself. Didn't even look at his face. The composure was absolute, the kind of composure that comes from having made decisions you can't walk back and accepting the consequences with the flatness of inevitability. Caldwell's rage escalated. He pulled out his phone. The first call was to Ronald Mercer, the board chairman. "Ron, we have a liability situation. Nurse performed unauthorized surgery. I'm reporting her for scope violation and patient endangerment. I need her terminated immediately." The words were clipped, efficient. Caldwell was already thinking about damage control. The second call went to the Pennsylvania Nursing Board. "I'm filing a report on a nurse named Danielle Ross. Scope of practice violation. She performed a surgical procedure, open cardiac surgery, without authorization." His voice was steady, rehearsed. He was building the case as he spoke it, establishing the narrative before anyone else could. The third call went to someone named Mitchell. "I need a background investigation. Full workup. Danielle Ross. I want everything: Social Security, employment history, criminal records. I need it within the hour." He hung up and left the trauma bay. Ross finished the last suture. The monitor showed 72 beats per minute, steady and strong. Hendricks' oxygen saturation was 94% on the ventilator. His blood pressure was 118/76. His pupils were reactive. His brain was intact. She had saved him. And in doing so, she had guaranteed her own destruction. The next 6 hours moved like scenes in a dream. Security arrived at the staff lounge at 6 a.m. with a termination letter. The paper was official, stamped, signed by 3 different administrators. Scope of practice violation. Patient endangerment. Unauthorized surgical intervention. Immediate termination. Your access badge is no longer valid. Your employment with Cedar Creek Medical is concluded effective immediately. She didn't read it all the way through. She'd already read the first paragraph, and that was enough. The basement laundry room smelled like bleach and industrial detergent. Ross folded her scrubs for the last time, a navy blue, the color of invisibility, the color she'd worn for 5 years at Cedar Creek Medical. The fabric still carried the faint smell of betadine and the copper penny smell of Hendricks' blood. She folded them carefully, deliberately, the way she'd learned to fold field uniforms in places where precision mattered. Top corner to top corner. Bottom edge aligned. A rectangle. A past tense. Her hands trembled as she placed them in the donation bin. Only now that she was alone. Only now that the mission was complete and the isolation was total did her composure fracture. The trembling wasn't fear. It was restraint finally letting go, all the years of holding herself together, all the discipline, all the iron control finally acknowledging that it had nowhere left to go. Outside the hospital, rain was beginning to fall. It hammered the parking lot like applause or accusation, she couldn't tell which anymore. The cardiac monitor screamed back to life. 1 blip. 2. The rhythm held, sinus, steady, impossible. Sergeant Major Hendricks' chest rose with his own breath, his own heartbeat, the one Ross had compressed back into existence with hands that refused to accept the verdict 5 doctors had already signed. The monitor climbed, 82, 88, 92. Oxygen saturation stabilizing. Blood pressure trickling back into viable range like water finding its way downstream. Dr. Caldwell erupted through the trauma bay doors 20 minutes later, his face the color of raw steak, and the screaming started before he'd fully crossed the threshold. "What in God's name did you do? What did you do?" His voice cracked on the last word, desperation and rage intertwined like electrical cords. "You performed surgery. You. A nurse. Without authorization. Without attending supervision. Do you understand what you've just done to this hospital? To me." He gestured at Hendricks' open chest, at the surgical field, at Ross standing there with blood on her gloves that had already begun to dry. "That's a felony. That's practicing medicine without a license. That's a lawsuit that will bankrupt us. That's criminal charges, for you, for this institution, for everyone who witnessed this." The room was silent except for the ventilator's mechanical breath. The surgical techs didn't move. The residents watched the floor. Nobody defended her. Nobody spoke. But the monitor kept beeping. Steady. Alive. Caldwell's hand shook as he pulled out his phone. He turned away from the trauma bay, his voice dropping to something worse than anger, controlled, precise fury that cut like a scalpel. First call lasted 90 seconds, to Board Chairman Mercer, his voice smooth now, almost reasonable. "We have a situation. A nurse just performed an authorized open cardiac massage on a post-operative patient. Saved his life, technically, but violated every protocol in the hospital manual. I need this documented, I need her removed from the premises, and I need you to understand that she accessed classified Pentagon files trying to blackmail me about a billing discrepancy she didn't understand." Pause. "Yes, I already called the nursing board." The second call came before Ross could remove her gloves. Pennsylvania State Board of Nursing, filed as an emergency complaint, Master Chief Petty Officer Danielle Ross, employed as a registered nurse at Cedar Creek Medical, performed direct cardiac massage and emergency thoracotomy on a patient without authorization, without surgical training, and without physician supervision. I'm filing for immediate license suspension pending investigation. Yes, I have documentation. Yes, I'm prepared to testify. The third call was to the private investigator Caldwell kept on retainer for problematic employees. Mitchell, I need everything you have on Danielle Ross. Military service, financial records, anything that doesn't line up. She's claiming to be something she's not, and I need proof. By dawn. This needs to end tonight. He hung up and turned back to her, and the smile he gave her was the kind of thing you feel in your spine, a predator recognizing that it had already won. Security will escort you from the building. You'll have 30 minutes to collect your personal items. Your access badge is being deactivated in 5 minutes. Don't test me on this. The OR doors hissed open. Nobody looked at her as she left. The basement laundry room was empty at 5:53 a.m. Row after row of industrial washers hummed their monotonous rhythm, and Ross sat on a plastic folding chair with her scrubs in her lap, the blue one she'd worn for 8 years, the ones that carried the smell of betadine and the weight of everything she'd given up when she'd chosen this hospital, this assignment, this new life of carefully constructed invisibility. The fabric was still damp from the trauma bay. Blood had soaked through at the cuffs. She could see her own hands in the fluorescent light, and they were trembling now, actually trembling, the kind of physical response that only came when she was completely alone. Her termination letter arrived at 6:04 a.m., delivered by a security guard who wouldn't meet her eyes. Effective immediately. Dereliction of duty. Violation of scope of practice. Falsification of credentials. You're to have no further contact with patients or staff. Your badge access is terminated. You have 1 hour to leave the premises. The access badge went dead at 6:19 a.m. She tried to use it at the parking lot exit and it simply didn't work. The red light, the soft electronic buzz of rejection, the whole world telling her in machine language that she no longer belonged anywhere. Rain hammered the Philadelphia asphalt as she walked to her car, and for the first time in 23 years, Master Chief Petty Officer Danielle Ross let her shoulders fall slightly. Not collapse. Just fall. She got in the car, put her hands on the steering wheel, and sat there while the rain painted the windshield in moving streaks. She'd survived Baghdad. She'd survived 4 deployments. She'd survived the Pentagon's cold directive to disappear, to become someone else, to erase herself so completely that even her own father couldn't reach her. But this felt different. This wasn't a mission. This was a life being unmade by someone competent enough to use all of his resources, and she was still calculating whether she'd actually saved Hendricks or just postponed his death by the amount of time it would take Caldwell to dismantle her completely. 6 hours later, at 12:43 p.m., the emergency department received a trauma notification: male victim, late 20s, gunshot wound to the abdomen sustained during a convenience store robbery attempt in northeast Philadelphia. 3 units inbound, ETA 8 minutes. The team was ready. Cedar Creek's trauma protocol didn't depend on any single person, and the well-oiled machinery of emergency medicine cranked forward, surgical suite prepped, blood bank cross-matched, anesthesia standing by. The Iraqi-Kurdish translator, named Jamal Rashid, been in Philadelphia for 18 months working through an interpreter agency, arrived at 1:11 p.m. with a through-and-through gunshot wound at the level of the kidneys, another graze across his ribs, and surgical shock already setting in. They got him into the operating room, into sedation, into the controlled unconsciousness where the surgeons could work. But somewhere in the recovery process, somewhere between the last suture and the wake-up medications, something shifted. His eyes opened. Pupils responding, tracking movement, fixing on the figure standing in the observation area, the one nurse in the room who wasn't wearing standard surgical attire, the one who'd stepped in after the official post-op assessment was complete. Jamal's body went rigid against the ventilator. He was trying to speak, pulling at the endotracheal tube, making sounds around the plastic, and the alarm started screaming. Ross moved forward instinctively, her hands on his shoulders, her voice low and steady. "You're in recovery. You're safe. You're in Philadelphia. You're safe." But he wasn't listening to the words in English. He was staring at her face, at her hands, at the way she moved, and the sounds he made became words, syllables, a name that echoed through the recovery room like a ghost materializing: Al-Saida Al-Zaka. Al-Saida Al-Zaka. The Blue Lady. The Blue Lady. 3 nurses froze. One started to reach for the call button. But the hospital's chief of security, a former Marine gunnery sergeant named Clayton Graves, 22 years of service before a roadside IED ended his career in 2009, was standing in the doorway of the recovery room. He'd been doing a routine patrol. He heard the name. He went completely still. And then he looked at Ross. The recognition happened in silence. 20 years of military culture in his body, the way he stood, the way his breath caught. He waited until 2 of the recovery nurses had refocused on the monitor, until Jamal had calmed slightly with another sedation bump, until there was a moment where he could speak quietly and no one else would hear. "Master Chief Petty Officer Ross?" "Command Master Chief of MARSOC Unit 17. She looked at him. Met his eyes. Nodded once. Graves' jaw tightened. He pulled out his phone and stepped into the hallway. The two-star general arrived 6 hours later, Brigadier General Catherine Kessler, United States Marine Corps, with a file folder marked classified and a presence that made the air pressure in the hospital administrator's office seem to compress. She'd flown down from Joint Base Lejeune Moorhead on a Pentagon call from Graves' former chain of command, and she entered the conference room where Ross stood flanked by the hospital board chairman, the chief of surgery, and a lawyer who still didn't understand why the Pentagon had called. General Kessler opened the file and began reading aloud, her voice the kind of thing that makes colonels straighten their uniforms. Master Chief Petty Officer Danielle Ross, Command Master Chief of MARSOC Detachment Unit 17, July 2002 through December 2018. 3 Navy Crosses, the highest decoration for valor. Pause. The board chairman looked like he'd swallowed a golf ball. 2 Silver Stars. Distinguished Service Medal. 78 combat operations across 4 theaters of operation, Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, and classified Black Sea operations. She closed the folder. Opened it again. Twice wounded. Twice returned to duty. Medical retirement effected December 15, 2018, with sealed record pending psychological assessment. All records marked Ghost Operator, classified at JSOC level. Dr. Caldwell, in his attempt to discredit this officer, accessed Pentagon personnel systems trying to prove she had falsified her credentials. Those systems are monitored. Those access attempts triggered automatic federal alerts. The door opened again. Sergeant Major Hendricks was wheeled in, still recovering, still wired, but conscious, his eyes finding Ross and locking onto her with the kind of recognition that only comes from knowing someone saved your life. He'd requested to be present for this. Against medical advice, the hospital administrators had permitted it. Hendricks' voice came out rough from the intubation, but steady. I need everyone in this room to know something about Master Chief Ross. My son, Jake Hendricks, 2nd Lieutenant, 3rd Battalion 5th Marines, served under her. She wrote him every week during his 3rd deployment. Every single week. When Jake's unit was hit with an IED in 2019, Master Chief requested an immediate transfer to Cedar Creek Medical because that's where they brought his remains. He looked at Ross. She stayed in the room with him. For 3 hours. Alone. Just staying. The board chairman's pen fell onto the desk. Hendricks continued, she saved my life yesterday. When 5 doctors, including Caldwell, walked out and declared me dead, she performed open cardiac massage and brought me back. That wasn't an authorized surgery. That was a promise kept to a dead lieutenant. To a mother who needed to know her son had people who remembered him. To a fellow Marine who understood that we don't leave people behind. 2 agents entered from the hallway. FBI. Their names were Martinez and Chen, and they carried documents like weapons. Dr. Richard Caldwell, Agent Martinez said, her voice precise and official, we need to speak with you about billing irregularities flagged by a federal fraud investigation. In your attempt to discredit Nurse Ross, you accessed Pentagon personnel systems trying to prove she falsified her credentials. That triggered automatic federal alerts. The documents spread across the table like a cascade of evidence, 18 months of systematically upcoded procedures, phantom specialist consultations billed to Medicare and private insurance companies, procedures performed that never happened, specialists paid that never existed. For $1,800,000 in fraudulent claims. Agent Chen, your investigator Mitchell didn't realize her records are classified Ghost Operator files. Accessing them illegally opened your entire digital trail to our investigation. You tried to forge documentation showing she'd falsified her nursing credentials, that's a federal crime. But what you actually did was lead us straight to your fraud scheme. The insurance companies have been cooperating with us for 6 weeks. Caldwell's mouth opened. Closed. The kind of moment where you watch someone's entire world collapse in real time. Dr. Richard Caldwell, you're under arrest for healthcare fraud, insurance fraud, and falsification of federal records. The handcuffs went on smoothly. Steel clicking around wrists that had held a pen, not a stethoscope, for the last 18 months while he'd stolen from the hospital, from Medicare, from patients who trusted him. They walked him out of the administrator's office and through the hospital corridors, past Jennifer and Marcus standing at the ICU station, their faces mirroring something between vindication and disbelief. Past Dr. Singh, who looked away. Past the paramedics who'd brought Hendricks in. One of them actually applauded, a single clap that echoed off the walls like a verdict. The perp walk ended in Philadelphia morning sunlight, at a police cruiser with news cameras already gathering, Caldwell's career dying in real time on 6 different local news feeds. 5 years later, the tarnished challenge coin sits on Ross's desk, the one they recovered from Jake's blast site, the only thing intact from the explosion. She stands in her office now. Director of Emergency Medicine at Cedar Creek Medical. The promotions had been quick after General Kessler's call. The respect had been immediate. The Pentagon had officially reinstated her records, and a shadow box on her wall displays the decorations, the Navy crosses catching light, the silver stars arranged in descending order, each one a story of survival and impossible choices. Hendricks visits quarterly with members of Jake's old unit. They bring coffee and that understanding that only comes from people who've watched the same things, survived the same costs. Jamal Rashid, the Kurdish translator, works now as a hospital interpreter and still tears up when he sees her. He still calls her Blue Lady in Arabic during their quiet moments, his gratitude expressed in the language of their shared history in Baghdad. Someone, she never found out who, started sending her annual updates on Caldwell. Today's arrived via email with a photo attachment. Richard Caldwell sits at a folding table outside a Philadelphia strip mall, wearing a cheap polo shirt with an insurance company logo, selling supplemental health insurance policies to people walking out of a grocery store. His medical license revoked permanently. His authority reduced to interrupted elevator pitches. His white coat traded for a polo shirt that doesn't fit quite right. Ross looks at the photo for exactly 5 seconds, then deletes it without printing it, without forwarding it, without letting it occupy any more space in her life than it deserves. She picks up the challenge coin, runs her thumb over Jake's name engraved on the back, the only memorial most of his unit will ever have, the Pentagon keeping even the dead classified. Through her office window, she watches the emergency department. The organized chaos of saving lives. The work that matters. The work 5 doctors abandoned, but she refused to surrender. Her phone buzzes. Hendricks' name appears on the screen with a text, "Coffee in 5." She nods, stands, straightens the shadow box where the light catches the gold of the highest decorations. She doesn't need to look at them anymore. They're part of her spine now, part of the way she carries herself through these hallways, part of the quiet authority that makes residents straighten up when she walks past. The coin stays where it always does, catching light, holding memory, reminding her that some people remain faithful even after the Pentagon erases them, even after the cost becomes unbearable, even after 5 doctors walked away and declared the battle already lost. If you believe stories like this matter, stories about the people who hold us together in the moments we can't hold ourselves, subscribe to this channel. Leave a comment telling me, have you ever been completely misunderstood by someone powerful, only to have the truth come out later? And hit the notification bell so you don't miss the stories of the people who refuse to give up, no matter what they've already lost.